Okay, so I'm back. This is the next day. I'm working on my shelf. I glued it together yesterday. I'm going to unclamp this, and you'll see I have a rough piece of wood that's about 14 wide and about 14 long, and nice and clean. So now I'm going to go to the planer and flatten both faces. I can actually plane it to finished thickness as well. So this is going to be 3/4 thick, so I want to plane it to finished thickness. Once my top is flat, I'm going to flip it over and plane the bottom as well. Okay, so I'm at finished thickness. I'm going to go back to the jointer and joint one of my edges. So now I'm going to joint whatever edge I want to keep on my shelf. I'm out of the danger zone up here, so just one paddle. Now I got a flat edge, 2 flat faces. I'm going to go to the table saw and cut it to finished width. At this point, you might actually want to check the width of your table to make sure it matches the plan. It might be a little wider, a little narrower. And then if it is a little different than the plan says, you might want to adjust your shelf so it fits nice and tight in there. Now the last thing I need to do is I have in thickness, both edges are flat and cut parallel, finished width. It should fit in there, but I can't get it in yet. So I'm going to square one of my ends and then measure to finished length. Now in this cut, I'm actually quite out of the danger zone if I hold it out here. And I'm going to have to use the sliding feature, so I'm going to come all the way out and then slide it in nice and slow. Right now, from my square end, I'm going to measure finished length. I'm going to cut it on the sliding miter saw. So there's my shelf, one nice solid piece of wood. And the last thing that I'm going to do with it is to get it to fit into my table. I actually have to notch the corners just a little bit as per the plan. And I'm going to be doing that. I'll draw my lines and cut it on the bandsaw. That's the next thing I'll do. But I need to notch out the corners around the legs of my table. And so that, if you look at the plan, is about a 1 inch by 1 inch square. 1 inch by 1 inch. And so I just use a square to draw my little notches. And I actually have found that you need to do just a little bit, almost 1 1/16 inch by 1 1/16 inch works a little better just to get it in there. So I drew all 4 of my corner notches, and now I'm going to go to the bandsaw and cut those out and then test fit it into my table. Okay, so I'm at the bandsaw. I'm going to adjust the height of my guide to be just above my lumber here. Now with this, you can back out of a straight cut. So you see I'm going in, and because it's straight, I can back out without stopping the blade. And now I'm just going to go test it in my table to make sure it fits and see if I have to adjust. Okay, so I have to take my drawer out, but I'm going to put it in here and test it. And that looks good. It fits quite nice. I have to decide which way I want the grain to be, left or right, or front and back. And it doesn't really matter as long as it fits the way that you want it. I think I'm going to do mine front and back like this. It fits good. So the last thing I need to do, well, a couple more things. I'm going to router the whole outside top, and I'm going to sand the whole shelf, and then I'm going to wood burn my name and the year into the bottom. Okay, after you notch your corners out, if you want to clean up the bandsaw marks here where it got cut, there's two options. I'll clamp it into the table. And if I want to clean it up or adjust it just a little bit, then I can either use the file or a nice sanding block just to clean that up before I go to the router. If you need to take up quite a bit of material, you might have to go back to the sliding miter saw, back to the table saw, or back to the bandsaw, depending on how well your shelf fits. And then we will go to the router to route the chamfers on top. Till I get it just perfect, looking great. And now after practicing wood burning a little bit, I'm ready to wood burn onto the bottom of my table. So I drew it lightly in pencil on the very middle of my shelf. And I'll be wood burning now. At this point I'm ready to glue my shelf in place. So I put a little bit of glue on top of the two cleats I've attached. And then I carefully place my shelf. You want to make sure if there is any space around the outside that it's perfectly centered and the space is even all around. And then I use some clamps just to hold it down. You might need 2 or 4 clamps depending on how flat your shelf sits. And then I glued the other 2 cleats on to make sure they were tight with the bottom. Put some glue against the shelf and against the bottom rail. I did the same for the 4th cleat on the other side. And then I put a couple spring clamps on those just to hold them in place and wiped any excess glue that was there. Making sure everything was sitting exactly how I wanted and no glue was left. And I'll let this dry until the next day. Okay, I clamped it in place. I let the glue dry overnight. And my shelf is installed and glued in place. Next stage of the table is going to be building the top. So I'll get a tile and or build a custom tile and work on the top of the table.